All right, we are talking to Ryan Stramrood today. Ryan, how are you? Welcome to the show.
I'm very good, thank you. Thanks for having me here.
Excellent. Ryan, you are talking to us from literally across the world. Can you tell us where you are right now?
Yeah, I'm in the beautiful Cape Town, South Africa. A windy day down here today, but wouldn't be
Ooh,
anywhere else.
amazing. So it's 9 a.m. here in LA where we are, a little after. It's a little after 6 p.m. same day, which is nice. We don't have a day ahead or a day behind.
No,
So we're sharing a day here. You're just at the end of yours, and we're at the beginning of ours.
absolutely.
So here's my. This is really funny because you're an ice swimmer, and I have an icebreaker question for you. There's those challenges where two people put their arms in coolers filled with ice. Do you win those regularly? And like, what's your record?
You know what? It's something that I actually adopt when I do workshops around the world with different teams. I often take those coolers in with the ice, and I'm the one who has to prepare them all and make sure the temperature's low enough because it kind of fits in with what I want to talk about and the messages I get across. And
Right.
I know that when I'm preparing them, I've got to keep my hand in a certain amount of time and just make sure they're cold. And I tell you, so often I'm so grateful that I'm not the person who has to do the exercise that I'm getting everyone to do. But
So
that's
it's
off the
too
record.
cold for you. Wow.
Yeah,
That's
look,
that's really interesting.
it's always cold. There's nothing you can do. You
Yeah.
don't get used to that level of cold. It's always going to hurt.
Oh, okay. Well, that's really interesting too. We'll get back to that. Thank you for that. I am Laura Cathcart Robbins. This is the only one in the room, but I'm never the only one in this room because, as usual, my boyfriend, producer, and co host, Scott Slaughter, who I call Hun, is here as well.
Hi, honey.
Hey, honey. So, like I said, we are talking to Ryan Stramrood. He is a
Mm.
multiple Guinness Book World Record holder, inspirational speaker, world renowned extreme swimmer, author, and single dad from Cape Town, South Africa, as he said. So I just wanted to start because I thought this was really interesting, and I think our listeners will too, that you're like this badass ice swimmer, this really revered athlete, but you weren't in your 20s. Is that right?
That's 100% right. Yeah, I'm not afraid to tell anyone. In fact, it's very much part of my messaging that up until the ripe old age of around 28, 29 years old for me, I was very much a couch potato, enjoying the
That's so
couch
weird.
and watching a lot of TV and enjoying the remote control and a bag of crisps or chips, as we call them here. Um,
Yeah.
and then it took something to get me off that couch, and so my journey began.
And were you a salesman then? Like, was that your occupation? Or so there
Yes.
was kind of like you went to work and then came home and watched TV like so many people do, right?
It kind of, yeah. I'm still a salesman, and I run an
Yes.
advertising sales house. So it was it is my own business. So I never went and had a 9 to 5 when you're running your own business, as you will know.
Right.
And I've never been completely lazy or a real kind of dropout on the sporting side. However, I wasn't pushing myself at all. I wasn't keeping fit. And I certainly had no interest on specializing in any sport whatsoever.
Right. So you liked swimming at that point, right? Like
Correct.
you enjoyed swimming when you did?
Yeah, I've always loved the water. I water ski, and in my early school days, I was swimming in the galas, and I was doing okay. I've never been super fast, but I was up there with the top. And then that kind of fizzled out. But in terms of recreational swimming, I've always been a water baby.
Okay. Okay. So what prompted you then to sign up for that swimming squad?
So I was, as I mentioned, running my advertising business, and starting to notice that I'm probably underperforming on that side of my life a little bit. But you never really know what to do or where, and I didn't want to join a team of anything like that. And I took a client away on an incentive trip. I've got a little holiday house on a farm, and I remember we were sitting on our patio having a beer, and I was starting to complain a little bit about how I'm starting to put on the pounds and not feel so good. And he suggested that I join his little swimming squad, which wasn't far away from my house.
Mm-hmm.
and get a few lengths in. And it was it kind of resonated with me, but it was one of those awkward suggestions where now a client has made a suggestion and now I can't not. So on Monday morning, I got out and dug out an old Speedo and a pair of goggles, and I trundled along and I joined this swimming squad. I saw the coach there and everyone was already in the water. And the coach says, yes, sure, jump in, pick a lane. And you look across this water and there's about 8 lanes with people swimming up and down, and you have to decide where you're going to go. And anyone who knows anything about swimming squads, the lanes are usually seeded. So you'll have kind of the slow guys and girls on that side, and it gets faster and faster and faster as you go to the left or the right of the pool. So, of course,
Yeah.
I jumped in a lane that I thought I would fit in, which was way too fast for me. And also true to form, you jump in, and what any swimmer who's tried this before will attest to is that your first 4 lengths that you do, you feel bulletproof, you feel wonderful. There's no, you don't understand. You think you're way better than everybody. Then all of a sudden that fatigue just hits you and you realize you're now leading the lane and you're in deep, deep trouble. So I managed about 120 of the 140 laps that they did at that training session before I was needing to throw up on the side of the pool. But that's how it all began for me. Yeah, pushed myself way too hard and pretty much hated it.
That's really, I would think that more people have found themselves in that situation where they jump into something thinking that they've got it, and then realize that there are people that have practiced and do this every day, and they're not just going to be able to join in. Yeah. Right. When you and I talked, I think you were swimming from Cyprus to Turkey. Is that right?
I was, yes, that's right, and that never happened on the last minute. It was cancelled due to some politics happening in between Turkey and Cyprus, because it was a big political swim. So I was invited to join a team that are made up of Turkish and Cyprian swimmers, as well as an international component. So when we spoke, I was jumping on a plane to go and do that. And I think like 2 days before it all fell to pieces. I was just a member of the team, so I had no control.
Right.
So unfortunately, that never happened.
Well, and I'm just, so I don't swim at all. I've never been an athlete, but I work out. Like I try to keep fit. I don't really enjoy it. So I was really interested in you going to another country to make this, just to swim from one place to another. And I was wondering, can you tell us about your first solo swim and what that was like?
Indeed. So, just take you back to that first session in the swimming pool at the squad, because that's where it really started. As much as that was a horrible situation, the big turning point for me, there are 2 things you take out of this. One is that I actually got off the couch and I went and I climbed in. That was thanks to a little bit of pressure from a work colleague, and I needed to just show that I'm making an effort. And then the other big thing for me was that I got up again on the next session and I went back. After that experience. And I was a little more humble about it and maybe chose the more appropriate lane. And while I was swimming in that squad, and I made the full set this time, and I realized actually I can do this. And here in South Africa, there's an island that I see every day of my life that sits out in the bay called Robben Island. And that is where Nelson Mandela spent 18 of his 27 years incarcerated. It sits off the coast. It is surrounded by some fairly brutally cold water. And every now and then somebody will swim from that island to the beach, or from the beach to the island, whichever way. And you would read about this in the local newspapers, and it would be a big thing. And I've grown up living in Cape Town, reading about these unbelievable people who make the swim without wearing wetsuits or any protection, just in their Speedos, a cap and goggles. And I've always been in awe of that, but it would never have vaguely pinged on my radar of things to do. But in the swimming squad, there was a guy who had done that swim, the Robben Island swim, and he ended up in my lane. Well, I ended up in his lane, rather. And I was in awe. I was too shy to speak to this guy. But eventually, after sticking it out with the squad, we became friends. And I had him on such a pedestal. And eventually, he challenged me. He said, "Ryan, well, why don't there's no reason why you shouldn't try the Robben Island swim." And it was such a foreign concept. It was a ridiculous thing to say to someone like me in my sort of frame of reference, because I'm not good enough to do that. I'm not equipped enough. I don't have the mindset. I don't have the body. And a long story short, Laura, I eventually set it as a goal. And I started to do the training, and I figured out what I needed to do. And all my family and friends kind of laughed, because that's so far away from what Ryan would attempt. And eventually, probably 6 months after setting the goal, I had opportunity to give it a try. And I swam from that island, and I walked out on the beach 2 hours and 15 minutes later out of that cold water, having just accomplished it. And that was my first real kind of accomplishment in the water. And it pinged heavily in my brain as to, well, hang on, I've always reserved that kind of thing for people way better than me. How come I've just done it? And what else? Where else am I selling myself short? So that was the first little trigger inside this brain of mine that, again, and that I would call that the real start of my journey in the cold anyway.
Wow. I want to talk about the cold water for a second, and we're going to talk about everything else too, but I've seen a lot of your videos. I saw you in one picture on dry land in a wetsuit, but every time I see you going in the water, you're like, what picture is that? I think it's on your Instagram.
Yes. So if you saw something very recently, I've recently done my PADI scuba diving course where I have to wear a wetsuit.
Oh, that was probably it. It.
Yeah, I know, I'm getting some flack for that.
Yeah, for wearing a wetsuit?
Yeah.
Oh, wow. Is it not allowed in the ice swimmer community to ever wear a wetsuit?
No, look, not allowed. It's there's no rule. However, if you want to be recognized for some of these extreme swims that I'm sure we're going to talk about, the challenge of what I'm going to describe to yourselves and the listeners is not the distance, although I do some extreme distances. The challenge is really the cold. Let's just take that Robben Island swim. It's 4 miles or 7.4 kilometers, which is a big distance to swim, but you can train yourself to do that. If you're disciplined, you can get in the swimming pool, you can get in the ocean, and you can get fit enough to do that. But the real challenge of that swim and many, many others that I've done since then is the cold water. It's the impact of the cold. So a lot of people say to me, well, why don't you just put on a wetsuit and, there's your problem solved. But that's like doing a cycle tour on a motorbike. The point is there to self-propel you. It's like going up the mountain in a helicopter. A wetsuit greatly eliminates the element of cold, and it also keeps you more buoyant and adds a few more benefits as well. So that's why I don't wear a wetsuit. And if you want to be recognized like I do for many of the things we do, the challenge is conditioning your body, but more importantly, your mind to be able to overcome and extend your time in cold water, which is very, very difficult.
Yeah. Okay. I get that. I totally get that. I also noticed, because I think you and I and Scott all share a love for that documentary, My Octopus Teacher.
Oh, yeah.
We love that documentary. And he didn't wear anything when he went in the water. He was just near shore. But it seemed very cold and very violent water where he was. Yeah. And he would just, he wore something. He wore a swimsuit, but he didn't wear any protection.
No, so he lives he lives quite close to where I'm sitting now, actually, down the drag, and he's on the so-called warmer side of South Africa, in the false space side. So that water it's not warm, coming from Puerto Rico the last week,
right?
And Florida before that. I understand what warm water really is. It's crazy. Here in South Africa, we call warm water it's really nice and warm at around 66 Fahrenheit, 68 Fahrenheit. And that's what he would have been experiencing. So yes, he did go in without the wetsuit. I also did note that, which gave him some kudos. But you're probably, I'm pretty sure the Octopus Teacher, when you've got TV cameras, you can cut and you can slice and edit however you want, of course. So.
Exactly. So Scott told me that some swimmers' bodies, like Michael Phelps, he says Michael's built for swimming. Like, he has this ridiculously long wingspan and those long lungs. Do you think your body is designed for cold water swimming? Like, do you think you have an advantage? You can withstand temperatures that people can't?
No, I do not have any greater advantage. If you compared me to Michael Phelps, I've probably got an advantage because the more I like being compared to Michael Phelps, but it would be a little unfair. Um,
Wouldn't we all?
yeah, it's a little unfair. In cold water, the fatter you are, to put it bluntly, the more insulation you have, and the better it is for you. So if you have a look at the average person who does what I do or swims in cold water, very few people do what I do, but in the cold water genre, they'll usually carry some weight. Now, I don't carry a lot of extra weight at all, so I'm actually disadvantaged. I do not have the right body type. Even when I was doing the English Channel swim from Dover in the UK across to France, that's 21 miles. In water that's about 66 Fahrenheit, 16 Celsius. I was told to put on 6 to 8 kilograms. Not sure what that is in pounds. I'm afraid you'll have to look it up. It's probably about 10 to what's probably double that. So it's probably about 12 to 14 pounds of extra insulation. But I was training so hard, the more you train, the more the weight falls off you.
Right.
And the more I was trying to eat. So yes, so that's a long answer to your question. I'm not built well for the cold. I have, I'm fairly thick set, which does help me. Anyone who is a triathlete who tries to get in the cold water usually has a really hard time because they've got zero body fat. I've at least got some. And that gives me a few extra minutes out there. But the cold, once you've got, you have to work really hard to condition yourself. Firstly, your body over a long period of time, and then your mind. And I hope we talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, for sure. There's a couple more things I wanted to ask you about because you're an open water swimmer. Yes. You're in the ocean. Correct. And I think wildlife and I think mountain lions and wolves and other animals, but there's obviously a lot of wildlife in the ocean as well. Yes. And I know that you're the only human in the water sometimes, like when you're on a solo swim. But do you always have creatures around you? And is that scary? What's the scariest and what was the coolest encounters?
Yes. So, as an open water swimmer out in the ocean, especially here in South Africa, we've got a great population of the great white shark. So, and that, and that's not known to be kind of user friendly in my space. So you have this constant fear, which is something which is actually part of this genre, is part of the sport, because it, not only are you going to be freezing cold and usually fatigued and chafed and stung by everything, you also got this psychological fear looking down into the deep abyss as to what could quite frankly come up at any stage and end it for you. So that plays heavily in the psychology of what I do. But that said, out of the thousands and thousands of swims I've done in the local waters here in South Africa and around the world for that matter, only on one occasion have I had a great white shark encounter, which was frightening. It was brilliant, but it was really frightening. So, but to answer your question directly, I am usually very much accompanied by all kinds of creatures, some that I wish would go away. Jellyfish are all over the place. Blue bottles sting you brutally. But I'd say on at least 70% of my swims, there'll be a seal who comes and plays, or a couple of seals who'll come and keep you company for a while. Dolphin are frequent. I've had whales right up close and personal swimming with me. I've even had yellowtail fish sticking with me for a long period of time and keeping me company. And yeah, I was really blessed in Puerto Rico now. Sorry, I'm still on a bit of a high swimming along. And along came, looking at the beautiful turtles, which are hard to spot in our waters. And along came a manatee, which I've, my neck of the woods is, you don't get them here in South Africa. So when that was suddenly next to me, I got a big fright, but it was absolutely beautiful. The most placid animal in the world.
So at first it scared you just because it's so big, right?
Yeah. I don't know what it was, at first. Suddenly, and it kind of crept up. I was busy just doing a little bit of free diving with goggles and snorkel with my partner, Lee. And she was just behind me. And, we'd heard about manatee, but you don't expect to see it. And all of a sudden, there was this massive shape right alongside me, and it really didn't give any hoot that I was there. In fact, I was in its way, and it kind of was foraging on the bottom and came and almost pushed me out the way. And
so
thankfully,
cool.
thankfully we had the GoPro as well, so we caught it all.
Oh, good. So maybe you'll be posting that, huh?
If you go to Instagram now, you'll find it.
Okay, good, good. So your book is called Push Past Impossible.
Yes.
And in it you wrote about this moment that you had in the middle of the English Channel, which we just talked about a little bit. You thought it was physically impossible for you to carry on.
Yeah.
And you'd hit a wall. You still had 4 hours to get to
Yes.
France.
Yeah.
Can you just tell us that story, what that was like for you? Because I
Yes,
can't
of course.
imagine.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, from how I started the story, a lot happened in my life to get me to a place where I was confident enough to set the English Channel as a goal. That is known as, for open water swimmers, that is known as the absolute Everest of distance swimming, the English Channel. So I'd set that as a goal, probably very prematurely, which is kind of how I roll. And one thing as an open water swimmer, you look very closely at the weather and what the wind is going to be doing. Obviously, you've got to know currents and water temperatures are your most important. The English Channel sits at about 16 Celsius, which I think is about 66 Fahrenheit. So you kind of know what you're going to get, which is classified as cold water. It's not ice water by a long shot, but you're going to be in that water for a long time. So I had done all the research and the homework to make sure I got a nice flat day where the wind wasn't blowing, and I could just focus on the 21 miles ahead and the currents, and get myself across. And probably about 4 hours into my swim, the wind picked up something horrid. And it was pushing, the waves all over me, and it was tumbling me around. I was freezing cold. It started to get dark. And I was absolutely exhausted, and I hit the wall. And I'm sure you know what hitting the wall means. It pretty much means the tank is empty. When you hit the wall in a running race or a cycle race or something land-based, it's generally catastrophic, and it's the end of your challenge. And when you hit the wall and you're in the middle of the English Channel, I'd been swimming for 9 hours at this point. The waves had knocked everything out of me. As I said, it was now getting dark. I was freezing cold. If I even put one hand on the support boat that accompanies me across, or they give me any help whatsoever, it is over for me. And I'd absolutely hit the wall.
Wow.
I could, in my head, I could not go on at all. And just, for your listeners as well, humans have not evolved well to handle the cold water. We've evolved extremely well to avoid it. So when we are cold and we've got this unbelievable powerful mind of ours that is working hard to make sure you get out. It denies you the ability of rational thought and the natural tendency to think why I should stay in here. All you can think of is why I can get out. So here I was in this horrible predicament in the dark with at least 4.5 hours to go if I was going to get anywhere close to France, with the waves tumbling me around, and I absolutely hit the wall. And that was a wonderful turning point for me. Obviously, it was terrible in the moment, but had I pulled out of the English Channel at that time, I would have climbed out onto that support boat 4 hours short of the French coast. Everyone would have patted me on the back and gone like, wow, Ryan, you swam for 9 hours in those conditions. How amazing, you gave your best. And I would have been this absolute excuse magnet, as I call it. I would have sucked all these excuses in, and I would have nodded my head and said, yes, I gave my best. It wasn't my fault. That's not the weather that we predicted. It turned horrible. So therefore, in my head, I would have justified why I can get out and why it wasn't my fault. And that is exactly what a default setting of our brain is actually designed to do. It's designed to, our brain has evolved to make you believe in your own limitations. Because when you believe in them, you have no reason to challenge them. You don't even know you can challenge them. And thankfully, I did not pull out of the English Channel. Largely because I had a very strong support team, and I had a brother who was yelling abuse at me and doing what I told him to do, and making sure that I got enough tough love to make sure I stayed in. And I managed to swim another, think, just over 4 hours to walk out on a French beach in the pitch dark 13 hours later.
Oh my goodness.
And I learned so much again from that, from reaching a point where it was impossible to take one more stroke. Yet somehow I kind of flicked a switch in my brain, and I changed from body to mind, and I'd managed to push myself for a long time in terrible conditions and achieve it. And that also, kickstarted a even greater journey for me.
Sure. I mean, that's so inspiring, Ryan. It's so
Thank you.
inspiring. And, you know, like for me, like I said, I'm not an athlete. I do work out. And from the moment I wake up, all the way into my workout, I'm making excuses in my head as to
Yeah.
why I can't work out today and I've worked out enough this week and blah, 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 or I should only do a half hour instead of the whole
Yeah.
workout. I mean, the entire time my brain is trying to talk me out of it.
Yeah.
And I do it. I do it because I've committed to it and that's just what I'm going to do. But
Yeah.
I can't imagine what it might be like to be in that place
Yeah.
where you have done the impossible already, right? You swam in these impossible conditions. Very few people, I would imagine, have done what you did with that type of, with those types of conditions
Yeah.
and gotten that far.
So I drew a lot of
Yeah.
strength from that, also because on the day that I chose, there was a relay team who was also a relay team. So there were 6 people sharing the load. One would swim, and then the next would swim, the next would swim for an
Ah,
hour, and they'd rotate. So they'd have a 6-hour break before their sessions, and they pulled out because it got too rough. And that
wow.
I drew, I drew a lot of energy from that. But what I love to share with people. And I hope, let me share it as it is.
Mm-hmm.
The human brain, and this is what I've learned, not just from the English Channel, but from a lot of swims. I don't know if we'll have time to cover them, but I'll get you some of the cooler ones soon. The human brain, the human mind is the gateway to absolute greatness. It really is. No one ever argues when I say that, because it is. But where I do get some pushback, and what I have learned, okay, firsthand, not from reading it in a book, from being out there in these hostile environments, that this gateway to absolute greatness of ours, this human mind, is actually our biggest limitation, because it is designed to hold you back. It has evolved to make sure you stay inside your comfort zone, and that is to keep you safe. Yes, as a human, you don't want to run off a cliff or walk into a fire or do something stupid like that if you go way back to caveman days. But there is a horrible side effect that we all suffer from today, and that is it has made us fear, or it is protecting us from the emotional pain that comes from failure. Okay,
Mm.
with failure comes humiliation and consequence and a whole bunch of other things. So in the back of our minds, we've got this unbelievably powerful tool that is trying to steer us back to comfort all the time without us even knowing. And I don't care, I speak to audiences every day. I don't care what you've achieved in life, because you will achieve in your comfort zone. You will get by. You will make that paycheck. You will get that promotion eventually. But on the other side of the line, that line that if you step over, there's a good chance you could fail. That is where the growth happens. That's where the magic happens. That's also where the hard knocks and the hard lessons are going to happen. So we steered back to comfort all the time. And that is partly what I've learned on this journey, and why I keep pushing it to colder and colder and colder water till I got all the way to Antarctica, which I'm sure you're going to ask me about.
Yes, for sure. Wow. I love what you just said. Thank you for that. And I do want to be mindful of our time. So there were two things I wanted to ask you about before we get to Antarctica, which is training for this
Yeah.
and what that looks like. And I also was quite impressed with like the recovery, what happens when you step out of the water. So can
Yes.
you talk about those two things a little bit?
Yes, so when we start getting to the colder and colder water, the most
Yeah.
dangerous. Okay, should we do training first? So, firstly, the training for something like an English Channel. See, we've been talking about that. Let's stay with that. That's a 21-mile swim in cold water, and a busy shipping lane and heavily currented. So there are a lot of
Mm.
things that can go wrong. I do what you call total body confusion training. You cannot slip into any kind of comfort zone. I do a lot of work in the swimming pool because that's most convenient, and that's where you can, it's a nice controlled environment, and I can get a lot of fitness there, and it's on my doorstep. I drive down the road to the swimming pool. But I also make sure I swim in the open ocean, not only on calm days. I have to train in case the water turned horrible, which in my case it did. I need to train at night because it's going to get dark. I need to train in the breakers, not behind the breakers. I need to be rolled around. I need to develop those muscles to stabilize myself. I need my mind
Mm.
to understand that it's not getting a level playing field. It's out in the real world. And no two scenarios are going to be the same. That Robben Island swim that I do it as often as I can. I've done it 124 times now. I'm the guy who's done it the most in the world. And each and every one of those gives me a different lesson, gives me a different teaching, because they're never the same. Stuff happens. So a vital part of the training is not to slip into some kind of comfort zone, think you're going to train in the swimming pool and then jump in the English Channel or whatever you're doing and get across. You have to simulate that. And I usually call it sort of an 80-20. I do about 80% of my training in the pool and 20% needs to be in all those horrible situations. So that's the training part. Then you asked me about when you get out, what happens. Now, the most dangerous part of any extreme cold swim, and this does apply to English Channel kind of cold, but it's more impactful and evident when you start getting into the lower down the temperatures scale, down to the 40 Fahrenheits and below. And there's something called the after drop. So the most dangerous part of any extreme cold swim is actually not while you're swimming. That's dangerous and things happen, but it's when you get out. Because while you are swimming, besides your mind implementing all its defense mechanisms to make sure you get out, it implements pain, panic, and fear, and hyperventilation, and all those nasty things that spin in your head. You deny the ability of rational thought, etc., etc. While that's happening upstairs, your body implements its own defense mechanisms. And that is the blood just rushes from all your extremities. So fingers and toes, yes, but also thighs and biceps and calf muscles. It runs out of those extremities into your center core because it wants to keep your heart alive to beat blood to the brain. You can live without arms and legs, but you can't live without a heart pumping blood to the brain. I'm no medical guy, but that's fairly obvious. Then when you get out of the water, when your swim ends, all that warm blood that is sitting deep in your center core starts to release, and it goes back to those extremities. But now those extremities are frigid because you've been in cold water for however long, and it rapidly cools that blood. That blood then cools in your extremities and it circulates back to your center core, and it cools your core temperature down. So it's called the after drop. So after swim drop, and it keeps going down, and that's very, very hard to control. And if it goes one notch too low, I'm afraid that's tickets for you. It's the end.
Wow. So what do you do?
You train hard and you find out where your limits are. Most people will never push limits too far in that. I mean, a lot of people die from hypothermia, some because they were in a situation they couldn't control, and some because they swim too far. But that's very few. I have, and that's where myself and a few of us have made a bit of a name for ourselves. We have actively gone out looking for that limit, looking how far we can push it. So what do I do? Firstly, I condition myself a lot. I sit in those ice tubs before a big swimming event. We bring that water all the way down to about, it's 0 Celsius, which is about 32 Fahrenheit, I think. And I get in my Speedo and I sit in this tub of ice and I process all those feelings, and I do that regularly so my body understands what is happening and it gets more efficient in harboring that warm blood. It builds my fat reserves in places that it might not have thought to do before I started doing this stuff. But then also, it's a willpower. We also teach ourselves very hard lessons of your swim is not finished when you get out. That's just the start of the pain. You kind of through phase one. Well done. You made it to the other side. Keep your head in the game, because you've got to get through the recovery process, which is that after drop. And once you turn that corner, it releases all these wonderful endorphins, and you're going to live, and everything looks rosy. And even though 5 minutes before you were saying never again, all of a sudden now you're saying, right, what's next?
That's awesome. So you're like in blankets, and do you drink like hot beverages and that kind of thing, or warm stuff? Or
yes, if you can. Often, when firstly you'll get out, there'll be no shivering. That's your real danger zone, because that's kind of your body deciding, am I going to go up or am I going to go down? When the shivering starts, it's absolutely brutal, and it's a terrible feeling. And it's actually very hard to, you're given a beverage, but you're shaking and your lips are all frozen, because, I'm talking about the real extremes here. But we do try and ingest a little bit of mild warmth. You can't have something hot because you'll burn yourself. And we've adapted a couple of golden rules. You'll see a lot of medics who don't know any better, with huge respect to these guys. I pay them none, but we've taught a lot of them, is that a lot of them will lie you down and after a swim. Don't do that. We stay seated. And we keep our head in the game. You don't lie back. It changes your whole blood flow and how things happen. You don't jump into a hot shower. If you're going to use external water, which we do use, then you start with either room temperature water and you slowly bring it up under a shower
Sure.
situation. And yes, you most certainly get dry immediately, get your wet speedo off, because you can't warm up while there's still water on your skin and on your hair. So you get dry,
Yeah.
you wrap. We often put hot water bottles all around us, and we go to a superheated environment if we have that luxury. So a sauna
Wow.
or a room that's superheated.
Yeah.
And that external helps you quicker with your recovery.
So that's fascinating. I wondered how you got warm because I'm cold watching you. And so I was really happy to see that there was kind of a plan for your recovery and getting warm again.
Oh, indeed.
So, Hun, how much time do we have? Is he there?
Yeah, we have about 12 minutes.
12 minutes. Okay. Because I want to talk about a couple of things, but let's talk about, tell us about the Antarctica Swim now, and then I want to talk to you about your team, because that was another thing that I noticed, and that seems to be a big part of how you get to do what you do is the other people that are supporting you. So tell us about Antarctica first, though.
Cool. So Antarctica was kind of the pinnacle of my cold experience. So we had been as a group of mates, really, just in a very kind of ad hoc way, haphazard way. Is that the right word? In other words, it wasn't in a controlled way. We're just pushing our own limits if and when we can on a shoestring budget around the world. And we had, and talking for me personally now, I had been pushing past my own impossible for a long time. So finding things that I didn't think I could do, figuring out how to do the training, doing the research, putting the team in place, and then getting them done. So we've done this around the world in colder and colder and colder water. And then we started getting to a place where, or again, let me talk for myself, where I wanted to try and push past what was meant to be humanly possible, because we had kind of reached that level that we were starting to challenge the conventions, medical science, what the medical fraternity was saying is humanly possible to perform under. And we wanted to see if we could perform under those circumstances. And the goal was set also as a bucket list item to go to Antarctica and try and be the first guys in the world to swim an official mile. That's, you guys know what a mile is. I've got to explain it down here. 1,607 meters in Antarctica. So we were aiming to do it south of the Antarctic Circle. Unfortunately, there was a long story. I hope people read my book, because there's a whole 2 chapters on this swim alone. Mm-hmm. And the idea was obviously, to use the ship's crew to support us, because we can't afford to take our own medical staff and our own support teams with us. We all, off out of our own pocket, and it's not cheap going to Antarctica. And it was an incredibly frustrating and daunting trip, because the weather didn't play ball. The team that we were relying on couldn't believe what we wanted to do. And although we were there to push limits and to go beyond, the medical guys on the ship that we were talking to also were saying that's a suicide mission. They wouldn't be part of that. And a whole lot of stuff happened. We were given, we were handed, and this factors into the keynotes I give greatly. We were handed on a silver platter 1 million times brilliant excuses not to walk down the gangway of that ocean liner in Antarctica and dive into that water. We could have gone home with our heads held high, and no one would have gone, oh, you guys should have toughened up. Every single excuse was a very valid one not to do it. And when you're in such a hostile, uncomfortable environment where you are nervous as a human and you're not getting any support from the people you really would like support from. When I say not getting support, I'm saying verbal. You're not getting encouragement. They're there to help you, but they're not saying this is a good idea. All these excuses build up in your head, and it's very, very hard to overcome that and still walk down that gangway. And that makes quite a fascinating story that you can extrapolate a lot of lessons up, because believe it or not, back in the office at home, exactly the same stuff is happening, just on a different level, and it happens in the back of your mind. Anyway, eventually we got it. The time came for us to give it a go in Antarctica. and the water temperature was measured just before we jumped in at 30 degrees Fahrenheit, which is -1 degree Celsius. So salt water
Ooh.
actually freezes below zero. And I'd never been in -1. And down at the bottom end of that scale, it makes a huge difference. Every little degree, every half a degree, dramatically impacts the time you should be able to survive. So we were really
Uh,
battling against that.
Ryan, can you hold on? I'm sorry. Our dogs are
Yeah,
going
sure.
crazy. Hold just for a second, okay? You were saying that you were there kind of at the precipice of jumping into the water. You weren't
Yeah.
getting encouragement from the people that were there to support you physically.
Yeah, so they were supporting us. I don't want to make them out as unsupportive, but they couldn't fathom
Right.
what we were trying to do. But they were on board. Eventually, when the weather and everything else eventually allowed us to give it a go. The water temperature was measured at -1 Celsius or 30 degrees Fahrenheit, which was absolutely brutal. And every single half a degree, that scale really impacts and shortens the amount of time you should be able to survive or to perform. Because remember, when, as I described earlier, when all that blood flows out of your muscles and into your center core, you lose any ability to use those muscles. They become uncoordinated because there's no blood in them supplying oxygen to give you power. You become uncoordinated and you lose power. Now, when you're swimming, that's obviously very devastating. You can't propel yourself
Right.
forward, which keeps you in the water longer, which obviously, at 30 degrees Fahrenheit in a Speedo, you're going to die really quickly. And we were trying to get, this distance done. And when I have trained for that distance in a swimming pool, which is a 27-yard swimming pool, I've got to do 66 laps to emulate the 1 mile distance. And that's never taken me less than 23 minutes. Now, from what research we could do, we wouldn't have more than 5 to 10 minutes to be able to perform before that blood has left the extremity. So, in your head, you really are pushing boundaries quite far. And it's a fascinating story that got us to that point. And eventually I managed to give it a go. And I swam for 32 minutes in Antarctica's 30 degree Fahrenheit water, and became the first human on Earth, I suppose, to swim in at least an official mile at those temperatures.
Wow. Wow. That's when was this,
This was in
Ryan?
2014, and that was kind of the pinnacle of
Yeah.
that's the coldest I've gone, and it obviously pushed me to an absolute fraction of my life. And there's some amazing, in my keynotes, I show some footage of that swim, obviously in the build up to it, but then also a little bit of that recovery process where that after drop is happening. And you can see I am completely, I don't know who I am or where I am. And
Oh,
but
scary.
somewhere in there, the training is kicking in, and I'm just trying to keep my mind focused on the recovery and waiting for that corner to turn and from that shivering to start. And obviously the doctors are there. And they're kind of faffing around you, but they don't really know what to do because there's nothing they can do in that very early stage. So it was very frightening. You also know, as a swimmer, I know without any shadow of a doubt that I am dying in that process. And I can see the ship in the distance that I've got to try and reach, and it seems impossible in my head to be able to reach it. And the only thing keeping me going, and this will tap into your question around the teams, the only thing keeping me going, although I'm the only one in the water doing it for myself, without the team next to me, keeping eye contact with me, not WhatsApping their mates or photographing penguins on ice, watching me swim every stroke of the way and giving me the thumbs up. I can't really hear them, but showing me clapping sounds and smiley faces, and I can hear them cheering and pushing, gave me the confidence that I needed to take another stroke and another stroke and another stroke, even though it felt like, my legs were hanging at a 90-degree angle because I couldn't use them. And I was just managing to keep my arms going and to make it back to that ship, which I eventually did in 32 minutes after leaving it.
Incredible.
Thank you.
Absolutely incredible. That moment that you describe where you're dying, but the ship is in the distance.
Yeah.
And you have to rely on the training, right?
Yeah.
To kick in and get you there, because you're not in control then. It's your training that's in control, that's kicking in, right?
Correct. Yeah. So
Because
I
if
had
your
very
mind
little.
was in control, yeah.
Yeah. So I've got to keep the determination. I've got to keep the belief.
Yeah.
I've got to keep the confidence, and I've got to keep my arms turning, even though I don't even know that I have arms anymore. You can't, you actually have to
Right.
physically look to see. Plus, your mind starts looping a little bit and you're going in and out of lucid thought. So there'll be a second of, am I still swimming? Oh yes, I am. Where am I? What am I?
Mm.
Oh, and then suddenly you're back in the game, and then you kind of drift out of it again because you're getting a bit loopy. So it was, plus you can see that water is so clear and it's dark and deep, and you're bumping into big boulders of ice, that are hitting you on your head, and everything's brittle.
Oh my
Everything wants to
gosh.
feel like it's going to break off. Plus, there's something called a leopard seal, which exists down there, which I didn't know about, again, it's a very exciting part of the video I show. This leopard seal comes to check us out. Sorry, where I was going with this is you can see low down into the water. You see the bottom of the icebergs you're going past. You see dark shadows swimming down there, and it all becomes, and you're dying. So your body's shutting down. You can feel it, and it's a race between total shutdown and probably death, and getting a hand on that gangway staircase to get myself out and claim that I have finished the swim. And all these things
Amazing.
that you're seeing and feeling and hearing and new sensations that I'd never felt before coming into it, required me to dig really, really deep to make it. And of course, once you process all of that and thankfully survive all of that, you can extrapolate some incredible lessons on the power of the mind and what actually went on down there.
Wow. Wow. I'm thinking, and Scott might talk to you about this in a minute, but I'm in a parka and knit cap and gloves, like when the temperature drops below 60 here. That's it for me. I'm in all my winter gear all the time. I'm so cold. I literally am cold listening to you talk about this, but I am in absolute awe of what you're encountering out there and how you've trained for this and how you accomplish it in spite of being intimidated by that first swim to Robben Island, looking across thinking I'll never be able to do that, or that's for other people. That's not for someone like me. Then to be the person who swims this swim in Antarctica and puts his hand on the gangway after those 30 minutes in unbearable, unlife sustainable conditions.
Yeah. So
Lastly,
sorry.
Go ahead.
After you.
No,
I was just going to say it's amazing for me now to go around the world and be the guy that most people say that's not for me. I could never do that, and I can try and get them back to the 29-year-old me who felt the same. And it's not all about trying to get people into cold water or swimming. It's about what you believe in for yourself and why you don't believe it and how hard it is to actually get to that place where you do believe it. And that's where I'm blessed to be able to deliver great value back to many, many people.
absolutely. And I know that's why you're such a sought after international inspirational speaker, because people want to hear that message from someone who's lived through something and lives with something and seeks out things the way that you do, right? You push past the impossible every time you go in there and take one of those, you have one of those adventures in the water. Last thing I wanted to just ask you about when we talked, so you're globally ranked top 50 extreme swimming athletes in the world. Was it 124 times the Robben crossing?
Robben
123.
Island, yes.
Yeah, Robben Island. But you said the thing that you're most proud of is your son. That's what you told me when we talked. Tell me a little bit about being a dad. Yeah.
It's everything. I'll tell you. In context of what I do, it's the negative first, and that is it's made it a lot harder for me to push myself. Last year I did a swim which wasn't a cold swim; it was a very long swim in some dangerous waters, and the fright, the fear for me doing it was greatly heightened because I've now got this beautiful little human who's now very dependent on his single dad, and starting to realize what I'm doing and that it's probably not a good idea, really plays on my mind on a level I never thought it could. So, but yes, being a father and watching this little guy grow and develop and everything, I know I'm speaking a common language to everyone who has a kid. I've only got one. He's 11 years old. His name's Jesse, and he's a little legend. And I really hope he never does ice water swimming.
You never know. I mean, you're a really great role model. I mean, for someone like me, you kind of inspired me to like think about getting in the water. Not doing what you're doing, but it sounds literally really cool to do that. I love that part about your story. I love that the thing you're proudest of everything you've accomplished and everything that you do is being Jesse's dad. And that this is something now that you have in mind when you're taking these chances.
Of course.
And that factors in, of course, because you're a dad. That's what we do,
Indeed.
Right?
Of course.
For everyone that's listening, one, I hope you watch this on YouTube and see the interview. Also, every way that you can find Ryan will be in our show notes. It'll just be links. You can click on them. You can go to his website. You can find his Instagram and all those things. Is there anywhere else you want people to look for you, Ryan? Besides,
Instagram. You'll have the handle there, but that's where I'm most responsive if people want to chat and message.
That's nice.
Yeah, I'm pretty good with that. I mean, I sometimes am a little overwhelmed. I do a keynote and then I'll have 300 messages by the time I walk off the stage. Yeah. So forgive me if I'm not very punctual. But also LinkedIn is where I play as well. Obviously more for the corporate, where I network a lot with people. And I'm very responsive there.
Great. Do you want to just say your Instagram handle really quick?
Sure. It's Ryan, RYAN. _Stramrood, STRAMROOD. There is a Ryan Stramrood without the underscore, but that's my private one where I've got lots of pictures of my son and my cat, which no one should be particularly interested in. So Ryan _Stramrood is where the swimming stuff happens.
Excellent. Ryan, this was a really exciting talk. I'm so buoyed, to use a pun, by it. And I'm really glad that we were able to catch up with you, like I said, halfway across the world or all the way across the world from each other, but still have this conversation. Thank you so much for coming on the show. Such
a pleasure. And thank you for your interest. And to also use a nice cheesy pun, what we've spoken about today is only the tip of the iceberg. Of course, there's a lot more. So I'd welcome an invitation back, and I also hope everyone wants to read the first part of the journey in my book, Push Past Impossible. Yes, which there'll also be a link to that. I mean, it's with your website as well, but you can find wherever it's being sold, you'll find the link to that in the show notes. Push Past Impossible by Ryan Stramrood. Thank you. Thank you again so much. Yeah, thank you, Ryan. Laura. Thank you, Scott. It's been a pleasure. Hi, I'm Ryan Stramrood, and I am the only ice swimmer in the room.